Story 37. The public library in our small town was an unassuming building, tucked away between the bustling cafe and the dormant railway station. It was my refuge, a place where I could immerse myself in the quiet world of books, away from the monotonous drone of everyday life. My research on local history had brought me here countless times, but today, as I browsed through the familiar aisles, a narrow section caught my eye, one I had never noticed before. The books here were older, their spines thick with dust, as if untouched for decades. Intrigued, I pulled out a volume, its leather cover cracked and worn. The title was faded, barely legible, but it hinted at local legends and folklore. It was exactly the kind of material I needed for my research, yet something felt off. These books didn't belong here among the well-thumbed volumes of popular history and biography that populated the rest of the library. As I opened the book, a cloud of dust puffed into the air, making me cough. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded to a dull brown. What I expected to be a collection of ghost stories or tall tales instead presented itself as a detailed account of missing persons cases that had never been solved, stretching back over a century. Each entry was meticulously documented: names, dates, and last known locations, but most chilling of all, the exact spots where their bodies were eventually found. These were not public records or newspaper articles. They read more like personal notes, perhaps from a detective or a morbidly fascinated historian. As I turned the pages, a cold sensation crept up my spine. The descriptions were too detailed, too intimate to be mere observations. One entry in particular caught my attention, a case from 50 years ago, involving a young woman named Eliza Grafton, who had vanished while walking home from the very cafe that now neighbored the library. Her body was found weeks later in the woods behind the railway station, an area now obscured by overgrowth and neglect. The entry noted specific details about the state of her clothing, the arrangement of the leaves around her body, and a peculiar, unexplained symbol carved into a nearby tree. Compelled by a mix of horror and curiosity, I continued to explore the rest of the section. Each book contained similar records, each entry more unsettling than the last. These weren't just records, they were confessions hidden in plain sight. Who had written these? Why were they placed here, in a public library masquerading as folklore? With a growing sense of unease, I checked the library's catalog, but none of these books were listed. It was as if they existed in a void, acknowledged by no one but now, disturbingly, by me. The librarian, an elderly woman who had always greeted me with a nod and a smile, suddenly seemed a stranger. When I approached her to inquire about the books, her face paled. "Oh, those. I thought they had been removed years ago," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They were donated anonymously. We were supposed to dispose of them, but it seems they were misplaced instead." "Disposed? Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They frighten people. Some who read them claim they see things, hear voices from those who are no longer with us." Her eyes darted around the library, as if afraid of being overheard. "Please put them back and forget you ever found them." Ignoring her plea, I took several books back to my table. The more I read, the clearer it became these books were a puzzle, each piece revealing horrors that someone, somewhere, had documented with disturbing clarity. My research took a new direction. I needed to find out who had written these entries, and why. Days turned into weeks. I became a regular fixture in the library, my presence tolerated but clearly not welcomed. Patrons began to avoid me, whispering behind hushed hands as they passed. The librarian watched me with wary eyes but said nothing more. One evening, as I pored over an entry about a man who had disappeared in the 1980s, I found a small, folded note tucked between the pages. In neat, cursive writing, it read, "Stop looking. Some truths are best left buried." That night, I took the books back to their forgotten shelf, my hands shaking as I placed them exactly where I'd found them. As I left the library, the wind seemed to carry whispers through the trees, the voices of those lost souls chronicled in my hands. I knew then that I would never return, my thirst for knowledge drowned by the weight of a darker, more perilous truth. Story 38. My job as a crime scene photographer has shown me the darkest corners of human nature, but nothing could have prepared me for the call to a remote cabin nestled deep in the Harper Woods. It was late autumn, the trees a cacophony of crimson and gold, the air crisp and carrying the first hint of winter's chill. The drive was long, the winding dirt road seemingly unending as it cut through the dense forest. Arriving at the scene, I saw the cabin, a rustic log structure that looked like it had stood there for centuries, isolated and eerie. The local police were already there, their faces somber, eyes avoiding mine. "It's a bad one," the sheriff muttered as he handed me the camera. That was all the briefing I received. As I entered the cabin, the smell hit me first, a sickening mix of iron and decay. The living room was a chaos of overturned furniture and broken glass. Blood spatters painted the walls and floors, telling tales of terror and desperation. My hands steadied the camera, capturing every detail with mechanical precision, a necessary detachment that my job required. But it was the wall opposite the fireplace that drew my attention and halted my practiced routine. There, amidst the carnage, hung a series of Polaroid photos, each pinned with a rusty nail. The images were haunting. Each photo captured a moment of attack, the subjects caught in expressions of fear and agony. My heart raced as I documented each photograph, the flash of my camera casting eerie shadows around the dimly lit room. It was the last photo that made my blood run cold. There, in vivid color, was an image of me. I was in my familiar dark jacket, the one I was wearing at that very moment, my face twisted in an expression of horror as an unseen assailant seemed to push me against a wall. But I had never been to this place before, had never experienced such an attack. The realization that I was looking at a moment from a potential future, a threat made manifest in Polaroid, sent a shiver down my spine. I called the sheriff over, pointing to the photo. His face, already pale, turned a shade whiter. "This doesn't make any sense," he stammered, examining the picture as if it might change under scrutiny. "You better take these with you," he decided, gesturing to the wall of photos. "Maybe the lab can make something of it." The drive back was a blur, my mind racing as much as my car along the dark, tree-lined roads. At home, I locked the doors and sat down with the photographs spread out before me. The images of the other victims were unknown to me, their fates clearly sealed, captured in their final, terrifying moments. But my photo was different. It was a warning, a premonition, or a sick joke by someone who knew me too well. Sleep eluded me that night and many nights after. I pored over the photos, searching for any clue that might explain how I could be both victim and witness, how my image could have ended up on that wall. The local police were investigating, but leads were scarce, the cabin having been rented out to various individuals over the years, none staying long, none leaving much behind. The weeks passed, and the tension grew. I started noticing things: a car that seemed to linger too long outside my house, unfamiliar footprints in the soft earth of my backyard, shadows that moved just beyond the reach of streetlights. Paranoia gripped me, tightening its hold with every strange noise and fleeting shadow. Then, one evening, as I sat reviewing the photos once again, I noticed something. In the background of my Polaroid, partly obscured by the angle of the shot, was a reflection in a mirror, a face, partially hidden, camera in hand. The realization dawned on me with chilling clarity: the photographer of my impending doom was not just recording these moments, they were orchestrating them. Armed with this new evidence, I contacted the police. They acted swiftly, enhancing the image, tracing it back to a former crime scene photographer who had disappeared from public view years ago, suspected of tampering with crime scenes he was supposed to document. The theory was that he had become obsessed with the macabre, staging his own scenes to capture the horror he once only recorded. A raid on his last known address led to a harrowing chase through the underbelly of the city, culminating in his capture in an abandoned warehouse, a makeshift studio of horror found within. The photos on the wall were his gallery, his victims his art. I was meant to be his masterpiece. The crime scene photographer turned into a final, grotesque exhibit. But with his arrest, that future was rewritten. Still, sometimes, when the light fades and the shadows grow long, I feel the cold grip of what might have been, and I remind myself of the thin line between observer and participant, between documenting darkness and being consumed by it. Story 39. The winding roads of the Appalachian Mountains have always held a mysterious allure for me. That day, with the autumn leaves painting the hills in fiery hues, I was driving through a particularly remote mountain pass, a shortcut I hoped would shave a few hours off my long journey home. The road was narrow and curving, hemmed in by looming cliffs and dense woods. As I rounded a sharp bend, a road sign, old and partially obscured by overgrown vines, caught my attention. It pointed down a gravel path barely visible from the main road. Welcome to Elkmont at Reed, with an arrow gesturing toward what appeared to be nothing more than a break in the trees. I had driven this route many times and never noticed this sign, nor was Elkmont marked on any map I owned. Curiosity overcame caution, and I turned onto the path. The road was rough, more a series of potholes than a continuous surface, and the woods seemed to close in around me. After what felt like miles, the trees suddenly cleared, and I found myself on the outskirts of a village. Elkmont was eerily silent. The village consisted of a dozen buildings arranged around a central square with a dry fountain. Each structure bore the weight of abandonment, windows boarded up or shattered, doors hanging off hinges, roofs sagging under the burden of neglect. Yet, there was something unsettling about the desolation. It felt staged, like a scene from a movie left behind after the cameras had stopped rolling. I parked near the square and stepped out of my car, the silence oppressive, broken only by the rustle of the wind through the autumn leaves. My footsteps echoed off the empty buildings as I ventured further into the village. It was then that I checked my GPS, intending to mark the location for later exploration. To my surprise, the screen showed recent activity, a cluster of digital markers indicating movement and heat signatures from just a few days ago. Perplexed, I walked toward the largest building, which appeared to have once been a town hall. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The papers and furniture were strewn about as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry. On a decayed bulletin board, flyers fluttered in the draft, notices for community events dated years ago, their edges curled and faded. As I explored further, I found personal items: a child's doll, a pair of glasses, a book left open, as if waiting for its reader to return. It was as if the villagers had vanished, leaving their lives suspended in time. But the GPS data haunted me, suggesting that someone or something was still here, perhaps watching. I decided to investigate the homes surrounding the square. Each house told a similar story of abrupt departure, meals left uneaten on tables, clothes still hanging on lines, photos of smiling families gazing out from dusty frames. The air grew colder, the sky outside darkening as if storm clouds were rolling in. Then, in a house on the far edge of the village, I found something different: an office with walls covered in maps and photos, red lines connecting points and dates circled. It was a research station, or so it seemed. Notebooks filled with observations lay scattered about, and a large ham radio setup indicated someone had been communicating with the outside world, or at least trying to. The last entry in the nearest notebook was dated just one day prior to my visit. It spoke of a phenomenon, an anomaly in the area that caused disorientations and temporal discrepancies. The writer theorized that Elkmont was not just abandoned, it was caught in a flux, visible only intermittently to the outside world, trapped by some unknown force. A chill ran down my spine as the implications settled in. I was about to leave, to run back to my car and never return, when a sudden movement outside caught my eye. Through the window, I saw figures moving swiftly between the buildings, shadows at the edge of vision. They were there and then not. Flickers of existence that teased the periphery of my sight. Panicking, I dashed back to my car, the echo of my footsteps too loud in the empty village. As I started the engine, the GPS blinked out, the screen going black before flickering back to life. The map empty of any markers, Elkmont erased as if it had never been there. Driving away, the road behind me seemed to disappear into the thickening fog. My heart pounded with the terror of the unknown, the rearview mirror reflecting nothing but the dense woods, swallowing the path that had led me to that forgotten village. I drove on, the memory of Elkmont already fading, like a dream upon waking, vivid yet unreal, haunting yet unreachable.